May be peace, blessing, and mercy on all of you in the name of Almighty One God. My name is Dr. Abu Abdullah, and I am researcher in Quran and Bible. We started a series of lectures of contribution of Muslims in science and art in medieval time. Today's lecture is contribution of Muslim in historiography relating to history. The desire to preserve the records of human achievement is very primitive one and dates back to the earliest known civilization. Such records were laid down to stupas, stone slabs, wood, and leather piecing, and are still preserved in the great museums of the world. The oldest book written in Egypt also relate to history, but the profound development of historiography and its elevation to the status of a science owes much to the geniuses of Muslim historians. Writing in the history of Muslim historiography, Franz Rostel admits that Muslim historiography has at all times been united by the closest ties with the general development of scholarship in Islam. And the position of historical knowledge in Muslim education has exercised a decisive influence upon the intellectual level of historical writing. The Muslims achieved a definite advance beyond previous historical writing in the sociological understanding of history and the systematization of historiography. The development of modern historical writing seems to have gained considerably in speed and substance through the utilization of a Muslim literature which enabled Western historians from the 17th centuries on to see a large section of the world through foreign eyes. The Muslims' historiography helped indirectly and modestly to shape present-day historical thinking. The science and arts which have been cultivated under diverse civilization may be traced to even earlier periods for their initial growth. Arguments and reasonings were used since the immemorial, but it has Aristotle who systematized the art of reasoning and gave it the name of logic. So it was historiography. People always took pride in relating the achievements and exploits of their ancestors, but the Muslim Arabs always had a particular attachment for their forebears. The lineage of each Dan was sacredly guarded against being forgotten by their progeny. Even the lineage of horses and the camels were preserved by the Arab Muslims. The advent of Islam paved the way for the growth of historiography in Arabia. The abundance of historical data in the Holy Quran provided the followers of Islam with an incentive to study history. The learned discourses of the Holy Prophet of Islam were always punctuated with historical reference to the past, which awakened an interest hitherto unknown for historiography among the adherents of the new faith. In the initial stages, historical events were mostly committed to memory, which led to differences in the reports of the same speeches and events. The well-known oration of Hajjaj bin Yusuf on his first entry into Kufa has been differently reported by various historians. But later on, with the appearance of celebrated historians like Waqidi, Balazuri, Denavari, and Tabari, large volume of histories were compiled. The works of some of these great historical minds have been translated into European languages. The main task of mankind was accompanied by Muslims, says George Sarton. The greatest philosopher, Al-Farabi, was a Muslim. The greatest mathematician, Abul Kamil and Ibrahim ibn Sina, were Muslims. The greatest geography and encyclopedist, Al-Masudi, was a Muslim. The greatest historian, Al-Tabari, was Muslim. History has always been considered as the most important subject in the educational curriculum of Muslims. A thorough knowledge of history was essential for princes, ministers, and scholars alike. No education was considered to be complete without a detailed background of history. Even the soldiers were taught the history of rise and fall of different nations, especially that of Muslim powers. So now we will discuss early historian. The anxiety to know the minutest detail about the life of Holy Prophet and his gifted associate led to great efforts on the part of Muslims to acquire the authentic version of the facts and to preserve them for posterity. The tradition of the Holy Prophet, collected by some of the celebrated historians of Islam, formed the greatest biographical history that had ever been compiled. Arab traditionalists and historians devised many means of ascertaining the authenticity of the facts. The reports were obtained and compiled through a chain of reporters and transmitters whose trustworthiness and origin were fully investigated. This necessitated a knowledge of history of transmitters, which ultimately led to the development of geography and biography among the Arabs. In the beginning, the source of information was confined to oral reports only. One device adopted by the early historians of Islam in recording the facts was dating them by year, month, and even by day. According to historian Bakla, this practice was not adopted in Europe before 1597. So, I repeat, before 1597, there was no such routine or practice in Europe of recording this historiography. So, I repeat, according to historian Bakla, this practice was not adopted in Europe before 1597 AD. Another method, that of historical research and criticism, originated by the celebrated historian Ibn Khaldun and practiced by the later historian, both in the East and the West, could not be surpassed even during modern times. History provides one of the most copious sections of Arabic literature. A Western Orientalist, Wostenfield, collected more than 590 historical work written in Arabic during the first 1,000 years of Islamic era, first millennium. The writing of history commenced during the Umayyad period and was developed during the Abbasid rule. The author of Kashfuz Zonan gives a detail of 1,300 history books written in Arabic during the first few centuries of Islam. Only a few historical works of the Umayyad period have survived. The early historians dependent on the continuity of the chain of reports, more particularly on the authenticity and the integrity of the reporters while recording the facts, and didn't exercise much power of analysis, criticism, comparison, or inference. The early historical compositions were mostly based on legends, traditions, biographies, and narratives obtained through a chain of intermediate oral reporters, each of whom passed on the original report to his successor. The composition of the real books of Islamic history started in the 2nd century AH. In historical research, says Amir Ali, the Muslims have not behind any other nation, ancient or modern. Archaeology, geography, and ethnology were included in history. Between the simple work of Ibn Ishaq to the universal history of Khaldun, there is a great difference, but the intervening space is occupied by a host of writers. Awana bin al-Hakim was among the transmitters of knowledge who lived before the advent of books. He was a man of humble origin, his father being a slave tailor. He died either in 147 or 158 AH. He was a great source of information for early Arab historian and is considered an authority of the Arab conquest. AH means after Hijrah. So, I talked 147 or 158 after Hijrah. Among early Arab historians, Ali ibn Muhammad bin Abdullah Madni occupies an outstanding place. He was a copious writer who was born in 135 Hijri and died in 225 Hijri. He toured Basra, Medina, and later settled in Baghdad, where he was patronized by the celebrated Muslim Ishaq al-Musili. He had divided his work into a group of books, the first dealing with the records of Prophet, the second with record of Quraysh, the third with the marriage of nobles and the records of women, the fourth was records of Caliph from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to Mutasim. The fifth with historical event in Islam, the sixth with Islamic conquest, the seventh with the records of Arabs, and the eighth with political history. Madni is cited as an authority by later historian. Yaqut in the Historical Dictionary of Authors gave a list of Kutab Malafa, said to be written by Madini. Abu Mikhnaf and Madini are, according to Brunei, well informed and impartial. The writing of Madini influenced a number of writers, including the Spanish Ibn Abdul Rabi, whose collection of speeches of Hazrat Ali has been preserved. His collection of correspondence of Hazrat Ali, Muawiyah, and others is considered to be very reliable. Hassan ibn Muhammad bin al-Sayyab al-Kalbi of Kufa was another historian who was much influenced by Madini and adopted this method of approach as well as the subject matter. His list of works exceeded 150 and he is considered an authority on genealogies. One of his works, Kilab al-Asham, has been printed. His books dealt with details of various subjects relating to Arab life, such as archaeology, religion, judges, cuisines, and jinns. Of his 129 works listed by Al-Fahriyat of Nadim, only three have survived. His other works were extensively quoted by later historians, including Tabri and Yaqut. The oldest extant The oldest extant Arabic history in the biography is the biography of the Prophet written by Ibn Ishaq at the behest of the Abbasid Caliph Mansur. Ibn Ishaq died in 151 Hijri. So, my friends, this was the first lecture of contribution of Muslims in historiography. Please keep on watching my channel, Dr. Abu Abdullah. Thank you.